Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy, and thanks for joining us today, September 19th, on No Greater Delight, our podcast on Marian feasts and Marian meditations. Well, today we have some very important feasts. I guess every feast is important for someone, but in a particular way, the Abbot Orsini reminds us that this is the feast of Notre de la Salette, which is an apparition in France from 1846. We'll talk about that shortly. He also mentions Our Lady of Healing in Mont-Léon, Gascony in France, but there seems to be no further information about that. So what is Our Lady of La Salette? Well, we have to go back to September 19th, 1846, when two uneducated youngsters were hired to herd cattle in the French Alps, and they fell asleep on the job. One was Mélanie Calvat, at the age of 14, and Maximine Guiraud, 11, each in charge of 4 cows belonging to different owners. So they fell asleep, and then obviously they woke up and they realized that the animals were not anywhere nearby. So they began looking for the animals on the slope of Mount Gargas, right? They found them grazing by a stream, and to their surprise, there was a large fireball on the ground nearby. As the young cowherds approached, they saw a woman seated within the orb, her head in her hands as if stricken with grief. When she stood up, they saw that she was garlanded with a chain and roses, and that her brilliance emanated from the symbols of Christ's passion on her breast, a cross, a hammer, and pincers. She spoke to them, weeping all the while, and interestingly enough, first in French. But then, when Melanie, one of the visionaries, didn't understand, Mary switched to their local dialect, right? She said, "Come closer, my children, don't be afraid." But the beautiful lady's message was as harsh as the rugged environment. She warned that because people were disobeying God's will, by working on Sunday and taking his name in vain, quote, "A great famine is coming. Do you say your prayers well, my children?" "Hardly ever, madame," they replied. "Ah, my children, you should say them well, at night and in the morning, even if you say only an Our Father and a Hail Mary when you can't do better." "Very well, my children, make this known to all my people." In fact, at that point, an agricultural crisis had already begun, which would indeed grow worse, and by 1484 provoke revolutions in Europe and send millions of Irish overseas. Right? Melanie and Maximine told their employers about the incident. The grown-ups identified the mysterious woman as the Holy Virgin and wrote down her message the next day. 5 years later, the Bishop of Grenoble approved the validity of the apparition, and the remote village of La Salette became a major pilgrimage site. My understanding is that this has also been approved actually by the Vatican. Then briefly, we also celebrate Notre de Marienthal in Haguenau in Bas-Rhin, Alsace in France. There, the Pietà statue was crowned in 1859 on this day. And likewise, Maria Santissima dell'Alemanna in Gela Caltanissetta in Sicily, Italy. That's Saint Mary of Germany. It's an icon from the 1200s, but it was solemnly crowned in 1954 on this day. Likewise, I found a source that says that today is the celebration of Our Lady of Divine Providence. I'm not exactly sure why one source said that. I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, but I think the actual celebration of Our Lady of Divine Providence is in November 19th. And that's what we're celebrating today in the Marian world. Not on November 19th, but rather on September 19th. For today, we continue with our reading from True Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary by St. Louis de Montfort. Again, we continue with Part 1, on devotion to Our Blessed Lady in general, and we continue with Section 1, Excellence and Necessity of Devotion to Our Blessed Lady. Again, we're in a part in the text now that St. Louis de Montfort is bringing out these conclusions. Yesterday we read point 39, where he says that, if Our Lady was necessary to God through this hypothetical necessity, God could have done whatever he wanted, but he chose to do it this way. And then Louis de Montfort says, well, if Our Lady is necessary to God, then she's even more necessary for us men and for our salvation, right? And so we continue with that second point as we begin with point 40. The pious and learned Suarez the Jesuit, the erudite and devout Justus Lipsius, Doctor of Louvain, and many others, have proved invincibly, in consequence of the sentiments of the Fathers, and among others of St. Augustine, St. Ephraim the Deacon of Edessa, St. Cyril of Alexander, St. Germanus of Constantinople, St. John Damascene, St. Anselm, St. Bernard, St. Bernardine, St. Thomas, and St. Bonaventure, that devotion to our Blessed Lady is necessary to salvation, and that even in the opinion of Oecolampadius and some other heretics, it is an infallible mark of reprobation to have no esteem and love for the Holy Virgin, while on the other hand it is an infallible mark of predestination to be entirely and truly devoted to her. 41. The figures and words of the Old and New Testaments prove this. The sentiments and examples of the saints confirm it. Reason and experience teach and demonstrate it. Even the devil and his crew, constrained by the force of truth, have often been obliged to avow it to their own despite. Among all the passages of the Holy Fathers and Doctors, of which I have made an ample collection, in order to prove this truth, I shall, for brevity's sake, quote but one. Tibi devotum esse, est arma quaedam salutis quaes Deus is dat, cus vult salvus fieri. That's a quote from St. John Damascene, which is, to be devout to you, O Holy Virgin, is an arm of salvation, like a weapon of salvation, which God gives to those whom he wishes to save. And point 42. I could bring forward here many stories which prove the same thing, and among others, one which is related in the Chronicles of St. Dominic. There was an unhappy heretic near Carcassonne, where St. Dominic was preaching the Rosary, who was possessed by a legion of 15,000 devils. These evil spirits were compelled, to their confusion, by the command of our Blessed Lady, to avow many great and consoling truths, touching devotion to the Holy Virgin, and they did this with such force and so much clearness that it is not possible to read this authentic story, and the panegyric which the devil made, in spite of himself, of devotion to the Most Holy Mary, without shedding tears of joy, however lukewarm we may be in our devotion to her.
Hello, and we hope that you enjoyed listening to our Marian podcast. In the spirit of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, we say to you that there is no greater delight than to spread the devotion of Our Lady. We hope you share these sentiments and encourage you greatly to share with a loved one. Know that you are always in our prayers, and we ask that you keep us in yours. God bless.